"You worthless piece of trash." He didn't shout it. Donald Trump let it drip out slow, like poison meant to linger. The kind of line he'd used 100 times before, confident it would shut someone down. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't need to. In front of her was a black leather ledger that had been missing for 31 years, believed destroyed in a fire that took out over 2,000 historical records at the Plaza Hotel archives. Yet here it was, cracked at the spine, carrying codes tied to 12 girls who vanished between Manhattan and Palm Beach in one December week of 1993. Some were 14 years old. None of their names were ever entered into official police databases. Not one case ever made it to court, and in less than a minute, the entire nation was about to see the page that made the room forget how to breathe. The congressional hearing chamber had never felt this small, not in square footage, in oxygen. White fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and unforgiving, washing every face in a colorless glare. Cameras hummed in unison, their lenses wide and unblinking, feeding millions of living rooms across America. No one shuffled in their seat. No one coughed. Even the sound tech in the far corner had stopped fidgeting with his wires. It was as if the entire building had leaned forward without moving, waiting for something it didn't have the courage to name. Jasmine Crockett sat at the center table, posture steady, eyes lowered just enough to make you wonder what she was seeing. Her right hand rested lightly, almost tenderly, on the black leather ledger in front of her. The ledger itself looked unremarkable at first glance. Scuffed edges, spine cracked like old bone, the kind of thing you might see tossed on a yard sale table for 50 cents. But for 31 years, that very object had been nothing more than a rumor, a ghost whispered about in hallways and buried in anonymous tips. It was said to have been lost forever in the 1997 Plaza Hotel archive fire, a blaze that consumed over 2,000 historical records in under 4 hours. According to every official record, this ledger was ash. Yet here it was, solid, tangible, its weight visible in the slight dip it made against the polished wood of the hearing table. Donald Trump watched her from across the room, shoulders leaning back in his chair as if trying to signal boredom, but his eyes betrayed a flicker. Quick, sharp, almost imperceptible. The kind of flicker you see when a man recognizes an object he's prayed would stay lost. A clock on the wall ticked once, loud enough to be heard. Jasmine slid her left thumb along the clasp. The motion was slow, deliberate, not hesitant, measured, the sort of care you take when holding something that could either end a career or rewrite history. The leather was cool under her fingertips, but the metal latch was warmer, like it had been absorbing the tension in the room. A bead of sweat ran from the temple of one of Trump's aides, disappearing into the collar of his starched white shirt. The clasp gave a soft resistance, as if even the ledger knew the weight of what it contained. Then, with a sound that was neither loud nor gentle, a crisp, final click, it yielded. It wasn't just the sound of metal meeting metal. It was the sound of a starting gun, of a vault opening, of a door that had been bolted shut for 3 decades, swinging wide. Somewhere in the back row, a woman's breath caught, audible through the chamber mics. Another aide's pen stopped mid-word. Jasmine didn't open it all at once. She let the cover lift slowly, the creak of aged binding whispering into the microphones. The faint scent of charred paper and dust escaped into the air. An odor so subtle, yet so ancient, it seemed to pull the walls closer. For the briefest second, she looked down at the first page, and something unreadable passed over her face. Not fear, not triumph. Something heavier. Something that understood the cost of what was about to happen. The overhead lights seemed brighter now, as if trying to wash the ink away before it could be seen. But it was too late. The black cursive had survived fire, water, and silence. It wasn't going anywhere. Trump shifted in his seat. The movement was small, but it was the first time he'd moved in nearly a minute. He adjusted his tie, glanced at the cameras, then back at Jasmine. His smirk was gone. Her hand turned the first page. The paper made a sound that didn't belong to the present. Thin, dry, like brittle leaves in late autumn. Neat columns of writing. No names, no photographs, only codes. E15, E16, E17, each followed by a destination, Palm Beach transfer, each stamped with the same date range, December 19th to December 22nd, 1993. The exact week of Donald Trump's wedding, the exact hotel floor sealed off for renovations, and in the far right margin of one entry, a red circle drawn not once, not twice, but 3 times around a single designation, E16. A low hum passed through the room. It wasn't speech, not yet. More like a shared frequency of unease. Jasmine didn't glance up. Her voice when it came was measured, unhurried. The voice of someone who already knows the room is hers. This ledger, she said softly, was not meant for the public eye. Not for hotel guests. Not even for staff. This was an internal movement log, and every line on these pages corresponds to the relocation of minors between Manhattan and Palm Beach. She let the words hang. The cameras didn't blink. Neither did she. In the gallery, a man in the third row leaned forward, his knuckles whitening against the wooden bench. The chairperson shifted uncomfortably. One of Trump's lawyers scribbled something on a yellow legal pad, tore the page off, and slid it toward him. Trump didn't touch it. His gaze stayed locked on the ledger, as if staring hard enough might turn the ink invisible. Jasmine turned another page. The entries repeated, the dates unchanged. The codes, always the same format. The inks, consistent in color and pressure. And beside several entries, small notes in a different hand. VIP floor. Escort assigned. No return log. She traced one note with her index finger, then stopped. Her eyes lingered on it for a beat longer than the others. When she looked up, her gaze swept the room slowly, as if weighing each person in it. Some of these girls, she said, were 14 years old. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They fell into the silence like stones dropped into deep water, and somewhere in the distance, far from this room, far from this building, the ripples were already beginning. Jasmine turned the page, her hands slow but steady, as if each sheet might crumble to dust under too much force. The paper had aged into a pale sepia, edges curling slightly inward, like they were trying to hide their own contents from the light. What stared back at her wasn't a guest list, wasn't a schedule, wasn't anything that belonged to the public eye. In clean, almost beautiful cursive, a sequence of codes ran down the page in perfect alignment. E15, E16, E17, E18, each paired with a date, each date paired with the same destination, Palm Beach transfer. And every date, every single one, sat neatly between December 19th and December 22nd, 1993. She didn't have to say it. The press already knew what those days were. The country knew. It was the week of Donald Trump's high-profile wedding, the one that filled society pages and lit up television screens. But here, in black ink that hadn't faded in 3 decades, those same days were written in a ledger meant never to be seen, linked to movements no camera crew was invited to follow. The same week, the same hotel, the same top floor that had been sealed for renovations, without warning to guests, without permits filed in the city's public works archive. Jasmine leaned forward, letting her fingers hover just above one of the codes, as though her touch might break the spell of secrecy it had carried for so long. The microphones picked up the faint sound of her breath. Calm, deliberate, betraying nothing. The rows of entries were hypnotic in their repetition. A column of codes, a column of dates, a column of destinations, and for most a blank space where a return entry should have been. But then there was one that wasn't blank. E16. In the far right margin, the code was encircled. Not once, not twice, but 3 deliberate, heavy strokes of red ink. The circles weren't shaky. They weren't rushed. Whoever had drawn them had taken time, pressing the pen into the paper just enough to leave a faint indentation you could feel with your fingertip. Jasmine paused there, her eyes locked on the mark like it was staring back. A small muscle twitched in Trump's jaw. He shifted, but not in the lazy, dismissive way he had earlier. This movement was tighter, more contained, like a man trying to sit still in a chair that suddenly felt too small. In the gallery, a woman in a gray scarf raised her hand to her mouth without realizing it. One of the camera operators zoomed in instinctively, the live feed filling screens across the country with a close-up of that triple circle, each loop of red sharper than the last. Jasmine let her fingertip trace just outside the ink, never touching it, never smudging the proof. "This entry," she said, voice steady but lower now, "has no recorded return, no arrival log in New York, no signature of departure from Palm Beach." She flipped back to a different section, her movements economical, as if she'd rehearsed the path her hands would take. Another page, same handwriting, same codes. E15, E16, E17. The patterns repeated, but only one bore the triple ring in red. E16, she continued, was transferred on December 20th, 1993. The same day the plaza's VIP elevator was taken out of service to install upgraded security locks. She didn't add that those locks had never been officially replaced. She didn't have to. A ripple of murmurs began at the far end of the chamber. The chair's gavel tapped once for order, but it was like trying to quiet wind against a door. Jasmine closed the ledger gently, the way you close a coffin. Slow, with the weight of what's inside settling like dust on the air. "What you see here," she said, looking from the panel to the cameras, "isn't a misunderstanding in paperwork. It isn't an overbooked hotel. These are movement logs. They track people the same way freight is tracked. The codes don't change, the destinations don't change, but some of the returns never happened." Her gaze dropped again to the ledger, her voice softening as though speaking to herself. "And sometimes someone thought it was important enough to draw a circle." Trump's eyes narrowed, the skin around them tightened, not in anger, in recognition. Whatever that code meant, he knew. And that knowledge sat between them like a loaded weapon no one had yet fired. The room was still, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. The air felt heavier than before. The kind of heaviness that doesn't come from heat, but from knowing something you wish you didn't. Jasmine tapped the page once, almost like a punctuation mark, then slid it toward the committee's projection camera. On the screen behind her, the triple circle around E16 glowed under the light, the red deepening against the faded paper. "It's just a code," Trump said suddenly, the words falling flat. Jasmine looked up at him slowly, her expression unreadable. "Codes are only meaningless," she replied, "until you know what they unlock." The tension in the chamber didn't break. It deepened, like the floor had dropped an inch without warning, and everyone was still finding their balance. Outside, on millions of TV screens, people leaned in closer without realizing it. They didn't know exactly what E16 meant. Not yet. But they knew in their bones it wasn't just a number. And whatever it was, the circles told them one thing for certain. Someone, 31 years ago, had wanted to make sure it would never be forgotten. Jasmine let the page rest beneath the glare of the projection lamp for a heartbeat longer. Enough for every living room across America to drink in the triple circle around E16. Then she did something no one expected. Without a word, she lifted the ledger again, her hands moving with the same deliberate slowness. But this time her thumb slid deeper into the worn stack of pages. She wasn't flipping forward casually. She was navigating with precision, like someone who already knew exactly where the blade was hidden. The paper whispered against itself, each turn sending a faint rustle into the microphones. Trump's eyes followed her hands. He didn't move his head, but the change was visible. The way a predator's gaze locks on when it senses the hunter has become the hunted. One more page, then another. Then she stopped. Her fingers rested lightly against the corner, holding the ledger half open as if savoring the moment before the curtain lifts. She looked down at the page just for herself, and the faintest shift crossed her features. Not shock, not triumph. Something colder, like she'd arrived at the part of the map where the ground falls away. Then with a smooth, unbroken motion, she turned it fully and slid the ledger back under the projection camera. The large screen behind her lit up instantly. The crowd in the gallery leaned in, though none dared speak. The document filled the space in stark, unforgiving clarity. Ivanka Trump, companion of E15. The text was typed, not handwritten. Block letters, crisp, official. Beneath it, in a smaller field, another notation. Assigned seating, VIP table 3. Private escort confirmed. The room didn't gasp. It didn't shout. It simply stopped. The kind of stillness that feels like you've walked into a room seconds after a gunshot, where the air hasn't decided whether to settle or run. On the other side of the table, Trump's chair creaked as he leaned forward, the overhead light catching the hard line of his jaw. For a moment, it wasn't clear if he'd speak or simply stand. The glow from the projection screen washed over his face, bleaching the color from his skin. His eyes flicked to the monitor, then away, then back again, as if expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something harmless. They didn't. Jasmine's voice, when it came, was barely above conversational level, but in the microphone, it cut through the room like glass. "This," she said, tapping the page lightly, "is not a guest list entry. It does not appear in the official family registry for the event. It does not appear in any public seating chart. And it is not marked as family or VIP guest." Her fingertips slid beneath the line of text, underlining it in the air. "It is marked as companion of E15. A muscle jumped in Trump's cheek. The tendons in his neck stood out for a moment before he forced his shoulders back. He opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to laugh, but nothing came. Jasmine let the silence stretch, knowing every second was being counted in millions of living rooms. Then she continued, "E15, as you've just seen in prior entries, is not a staff member, not a hotel liaison, and not a known guest. E15 is one of the unidentified minors transferred from Manhattan to Palm Beach during the week of your wedding." The words hung there, heavy as lead. The gallery stayed still. A reporter in the press row lowered her pen without realizing it. On the monitor, the block letters glared back. "Ivanka Trump, companion of E15. Trump's lips parted, and this time the words came out, raw and jagged. "She was a child," he said, his voice cracking at the edge. "She was 14 years old. My daughter." Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her reply was quiet, almost gentle in tone, but there was nothing soft in the impact. "Yes," she said. "She was 14, and she is still listed here, under escort services." A murmur threatened to ripple through the room but never fully formed. It was as though even sound itself understood the weight of staying still. Trump leaned back, his chest rising a little too fast. One hand gripped the edge of the table, the knuckles pale. His lawyers avoided looking at the screen entirely. Jasmine glanced once at the committee panel, then back to the ledger. Her voice didn't rise, but her pace sharpened. "The name Ivanka Trump does not appear anywhere in the official guest index for the event. Not in the security passes, not in the press packets, not in the seating registry. Yet here it is, buried on page 27 of an internal coordination log, as a companion to a minor who no longer exists in any formal record." She tapped the code E15 on the page, her nail clicking lightly against the projection glass. "This entry," she continued, "wasn't misplaced. It was buried, and it was buried under falsified expense reports filed to the Trump Foundation's sealed archive." Somewhere in the back row, a man exhaled sharply, the sound breaking the spell for just an instant. Trump shifted again, but slower this time, as if every movement had become heavier. "That page wasn't supposed to be in there," he muttered, too low for the microphones to miss. "It's not real. It's in your foundation's own filing," Jasmine interrupted, her voice flat but unshakable. On the screen, the bold black letters remained unblinking. And still, no one in the room breathed like they had before. Because in that moment, they all understood. The silence wasn't absence. It was weight. The kind that crushes even the loudest men when the paper in front of them refuses to burn. The chairperson's eyes darted briefly toward the audience, as if expecting something or someone. A subtle shift in posture swept the committee bench, like they had collectively braced for a second wave. From the third row of the gallery, a woman stood. She rose without ceremony, without a glance at the cameras, her movements slow and deliberate, like she'd been sitting on this moment for far too long. No makeup softened the lines carved by time and survival. Her hair was pulled back in a low, unadorned bun. The dress she wore, once white, had faded into a bruised ivory, its fabric carrying the faint creases of years folded away. The muted hum of the overhead lights seemed to lean toward her as she stepped into the aisle. Her shoes clicked softly against the marble floor, a rhythm that wasn't confident, but steady. the gait of someone who has carried weight alone for decades. No one whispered her name. No one reached for a phone. The silence that followed her up the narrow path to the witness table was the kind that swallows every other sound in the room. Jasmine Crockett's eyes found her, and for the first time that day, her composure shifted. Not much, just a faint narrowing at the edges, a recognition that what was about to happen would change the temperature of the room. The woman reached the table and sat down. She didn't fuss with the chair, didn't adjust the microphone. She simply placed both hands flat against the polished wood, fingers spread slightly apart as if staking her claim to this square of space. The clerk leaned forward. "For the record," he said gently, "please state your full name." The woman looked directly into the committee's eyes, her voice emerging low but unwavering. "My name," she said, "is Maria Escobar." The name alone didn't break the room. Not yet. But the pause she took afterward, the measured breath she drew before speaking again, was like a crack spreading through ice. Her gaze shifted, finding Donald Trump across the table. She didn't glare. She didn't tremble. She simply looked at him the way one might look at a photograph long after the person in it has gone to the grave. "And," she said, the next words pulled from somewhere deep in her ribcage, "I am E16. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It wasn't shock. It was something heavier, the subtle shared intake of breath that happens when everyone in a room realizes they've been standing on thin ice the entire time and just heard it splinter. The clerk's pen froze mid-scratch. A cameraman shifted, but not to adjust his lens, to steady his grip. Trump's expression tightened, his jaw set, his lips pressed into a flat, bloodless line. It was the look of a man who suddenly recognized a ghost in daylight. Maria didn't look away from him. Her voice held no theatrics, no tremor for sympathy. It was the voice of someone who had rehearsed these words in her head for decades and was now speaking them into air that could not be taken back. 30 years ago, she began, I was told I'd be working one night, serving drinks at a private wedding. No experience needed. Good pay. She paused. Good. It was supposed to be easy money. Her fingers curled slightly against the table as she spoke, nails pressing into the grain. But when I arrived, there were no uniforms, no trays, no instructions for service. Just 10 girls, all in white dresses we didn't own, told to smile and stand near men with cameras. The hearing room stayed silent, but the air felt tighter now, the kind of tightness that makes you instinctively inhale less. We weren't taken to the ballroom, she continued. We were led through a service elevator straight to the 3rd floor, the VIP wing. No IDs, no questions. Doors that locked from the outside. Somewhere in the back, a muffled cough broke the stillness, only to be swallowed by it again. Maria's eyes flickered, not in fear, but in recollection. I remember the suite, gold-framed mirrors, red velvet chairs, champagne waiting on a silver cart. It was too perfect, too quiet, like a stage set for an audience that hadn't arrived yet. She exhaled slowly, her voice dipping even lower. And then he was there. She didn't need to say his name. Every gaze in the room followed hers to the man sitting under the glare of the projector's light. Donald Trump, she said finally, almost clinically, laughing, holding a glass, standing beside Jeffrey Epstein as if they were the ones getting married. The sentence landed without theatrics, but the stillness after it felt like a held breath in the middle of winter. Trump shifted in his chair, leaning forward. I don't know this woman, he barked suddenly, the sharpness of his tone breaking the hush. Never met her in my life. Maria didn't blink. But I remember your cologne. A shiver passed through the gallery. Not from cold, but from the precision of the hit. The detail was too intimate, too anchored in sensory memory to be an accident. Jasmine's eyes stayed fixed on Maria, but she didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. This was the kind of truth that didn't need reinforcement, only space to breathe. Maria sat back slightly, her shoulders easing for the first time. You called me sweetheart. You said Epstein likes the quiet ones. The words weren't loud, but in the microphone they seemed to settle in the bones of everyone who heard them. I was 16, she added, and from that night on, I was no one's guest. I was no one's staff. I was E16. And with that, the ice didn't just crack. It began to break apart. Maria's hands stayed flat on the table, the knuckles paling slightly as if to anchor herself in the present before she pulled the room backward, into the night where her code first took shape. "It started," she said slowly, "with a phone call from a woman I didn't know. She said there was work, one night only, serving champagne at a wedding in Manhattan. No uniform needed, no prior experience. $200 cash paid before I left." She paused. At 16, that sounded like more money than I'd ever seen in one place. The committee leaned in, though no one dared interrupt. "When I arrived," Maria continued, "the lobby wasn't the kind of place you just walk into. It smelled like money, polished marble, and a perfume I couldn't name but would never forget. They didn't take us through the front. We were met by a man in a black suit who said, 'Follow me.'" Her eyes narrowed, reliving the turns. "He didn't take us toward the ballroom. He led us to a service hallway. Narrow, dim, the smell of bleach and stale air trapped between the walls. 10 of us, all girls, followed him into a service elevator." Maria's voice dipped, each word measured. "The doors closed, and I remember thinking how quiet it was. You could hear the cables groan as we went up. No music, no chatter, just the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears." She inhaled slowly, as if tasting the air from that night. "When the doors opened, there was no carpeted hallway, no crowd of guests. Just a short corridor ending in 2 double doors, and those doors were already locked from the outside." The audience in the gallery shifted uneasily. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave Maria's face. "A man with a key card let us in," she said, her voice flattening. "It was a suite. Everything was red velvet. The curtains, the chairs, even the carpet. Mirrors in gold frames lined the walls, so no matter where you stood, you could see yourself, or someone watching you. The air was thick with cologne, the expensive kind, but underneath it was something else. Sweat, old, stale, and heavy. A faint tremor edged her next breath. We were told to stand near the bar cart and smile when the guests came in. No instructions beyond that. No one told us who the guests were." Maria's gaze drifted toward the far end of the room, as if she could still see him there. "And then Donald Trump walked in." Her tone didn't sharpen, didn't falter. It was matter of fact, and that made it worse. "He was laughing, holding a champagne flute, and next to him was Jeffrey Epstein. They looked like men who had already been celebrating for hours, like nothing in the world could touch them." Trump shifted in his chair, but Maria didn't break eye contact. "He didn't look at all of us," she said. "Not at first. He scanned the room like he was looking for something specific, or someone. And when his eyes landed on me, he didn't look away." A shiver rippled through the gallery. The microphones picked up the faint creak of leather as Trump's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. "He walked over," Maria continued, "slowly, the kind of slow that says, 'I own the seconds you're standing in.' He stopped about 2 meters from me, close enough to smell the alcohol on his breath, to see the condensation on the glass in his hand." She swallowed once, the movement sharp in the silence. "He lifted his champagne flute, tilted it slightly toward me and said," Maria's voice dropped into the exact cadence. The exact rhythm burned into her memory. "'Smile, sweetheart. Epstein likes the quiet ones.'" The sentence seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, the syllables stretching across the space between her and the man who had spoken them 3 decades ago. A low, involuntary sound moved through the gallery. Not words, just the human body's way of rejecting what it hears. Maria didn't flinch. "I smiled," she said, "because at 16 I thought that's what you did when someone like that told you to, and because I didn't yet understand what it meant to be E16. She let the silence after that carry its own weight, the hearing room straining under the pressure of everything unspoken. "The rest of the night," she said finally, "is what you'll find in the ledger, codes, dates, and a destination I didn't choose. But it started here, in this room. In that dress, 2 meters away from Donald Trump." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling through her nose, her eyes still locked on him. "And I remember every detail, down to the way the gold on the mirrors caught the light when you said it." The words settled like dust in the chamber, not loud but inescapable. Maria let the silence hold for a beat longer, then reached down beside her chair. From a worn leather pouch, She drew out a folded sheet of paper, so fragile it seemed to breathe when she moved it. She placed it on the table in front of her. The overhead lights found it instantly. Edges yellowed, one corner torn, the fibers thinning from decades of being folded and unfolded. Her fingertips lingered on the creases before she slid it forward toward the clerk. "This," she said evenly, "is my escort log." The clerk took it with gloved hands, unfolding it carefully as though it might dissolve into dust if handled too quickly. He placed it under the projection camera. On the large screen behind Jasmine, the black typewriter text appeared, stark against the faded paper. E16, departure, Manhattan. Arrival, Palm Beach. Time, 02:43 a.m. The date sat at the top, December 20th, 1993. The same night marked in the ledger, the same week as the codes, the same sealed-off floor at the plaza. But it wasn't just the typed words that froze the room. In the bottom right corner, pressed into the paper with unmistakable force, was a red-inked stamp. Mar-a-Lago Security. Entry confirmed. A ripple of air seemed to move through the chamber, though no one had shifted in their seat. The weight of that stamp, the collision of her story with the physical proof, seemed to change the very density of the space. Maria kept her gaze fixed on Trump. "You can call me a liar," she said softly. "You can say you don't remember me. But this paper remembers. The ink remembers." On the screen, the words in the stamp seemed to glare under the white light. They weren't whispers anymore. They were declarations. Trump leaned forward, both palms flat on the table. This is nonsense," he said, the attempt at a laugh catching in his throat. "Anybody could have typed that. It's fake. Completely fake." His voice pitched up slightly on the last word, a note too sharp to belong to certainty. "We verified the ink," Jasmine said, not looking at him. "The paper stock, even the pressure indentations from the typewriter. It matches security logs from your own properties in 1993. Trump's eyes darted to the cameras, then away just as quickly. "You can forge a stamp," he muttered, but the syllables were low now, almost swallowed. Maria leaned forward, her hands folded loosely on the table. "Why would anyone forge a one-way trip?" she asked. "No return line, no follow-up entry, just gone." The question hung there, unanswered, its echo caught somewhere between accusation and confession. In the gallery, a man shifted uncomfortably, his shoes scuffing against the marble. The sound was loud in the stillness. Trump adjusted his tie. His jaw moved like he was about to speak again, but instead his gaze slid toward the table's edge, avoiding the giant projection of the document behind Jasmine. His eyes flicked briefly toward one of his lawyers, then down at the glass of water in front of him. It was the look of a man who could not meet the eyes of his own past. Maria didn't look away. "You can't erase what happened by pretending not to see it," she said. "And you can't burn every copy. I kept this for 30 years, hidden, waiting, because I knew there would come a day when you couldn't control the room anymore." The clerk, still wearing gloves, adjusted the paper slightly so the stamp caught the light at a sharper angle. The texture of the embossing was visible now, the ridges and valleys pressed into the fibers of the page. It was real in a way that no denial could make unreal. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Mr. Trump, are you denying that Mar-a-Lago Security used this stamp in 1993? Trump's lips pressed together. His throat moved in a swallow, slow and deliberate. "I don't recall," he said finally. The words were meant to sound measured, but they landed like an admission. The cameras caught the flicker, just a moment, when his eyes dropped, avoiding the document entirely. The kind of micro-movement that body language experts would replay for weeks. "You don't recall," Jasmine repeated, not as a question, but as a statement. She let it sit there, cold and immovable. Maria's voice broke the pause. "I recall everything. The ride in the dark, the smell of leather seats, the way the driver didn't speak. I remember the folder on the seat beside me and the whisper when the door closed. Palm Beach. No stops. Hasuan." Her words moved slowly, like stepping stones across a river no one wanted to cross. "And I remember stepping out into the humid air at 2:43 in the morning, past the gates, past the guards, into a place I was never meant to leave." She glanced back at the projection of the stamp. And this remembers it too. The chamber didn't break into noise. It sank deeper into stillness. The kind of stillness that says a door has just been opened to something no one can shut again. Trump reached for his glass, but his hand didn't steady until it was halfway to his mouth. He took a sip, set it down, and stared at the condensation ring it left on the table. He didn't look at the stamp. He didn't look at her. The chairperson cleared his throat, a subtle signal that the next witness was ready. A shadow shifted in the aisle. From the far side of the chamber, a man stepped forward. Tall, lean, his suit pressed but modest. The kind you keep in the back of a closet for funerals and occasions you wish you didn't have to attend. His hair had thinned and silvered at the edges, his face lined with the quiet erosion of time. He carried a leather-bound folio pressed to his chest with both hands, as though it were something sacred or dangerous. He reached the witness table and remained standing for a moment, scanning the room before taking the seat beside the microphone. "Please state your name for the record," the clerk prompted. His voice was low, steady. "Gregory Finch." "Mr. Finch," Jasmine said, "what was your role at the Trump Maples wedding in December 1993? Finch set the folio down on the table. The sound of leather meeting wood echoed faintly in the chamber. "I was the official photographer," he replied, "contracted by the event coordination team, not the family. Paid in full 2 weeks prior. My job was to capture the evening. Every table, every guest, every moment they wanted remembered." He unlatched the folio with deliberate care. "But there were also moments I was told not to remember." The first plastic sleeve slid out, the photograph inside soft in focus, but sharp enough to cut through the room. Under the projection camera, it came to life on the screen. A line of girls, all dressed in white, standing shoulder to shoulder in the back of a ballroom. No corsages, no name tags, no adults beside them. One girl in the center had been circled in red ink. E16. The gallery murmured, the sound rolling like a wave before breaking into silence again. Maria's eyes stayed on the screen, unblinking. "This was taken before the main reception began," Finch said. "I was instructed to photograph every table, every group, but these girls weren't on the guest list. They weren't seated. They were lined up like inventory." Trump shifted in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. His hands folded, then unfolded, the movement restless. Finch slid out another sleeve. This one, closer in. The same row of girls, their arms stiff behind their backs, eyes directed just off camera. One of them, E16, seemed frozen mid-breath. "Who told you to take these?" Jasmine asked. Finch hesitated, the pause heavy. "A man I didn't recognize. He wasn't part of Trump's staff or the bridal team, but he wore a pin, silver shaped like a falcon. I'd seen that pin before, in photographs of Jeffrey Epstein's associates." The room shifted. It was the subtle change in body language that happens when every person realizes they're hearing something that won't leave them. "He told me to shoot from the waist up," Finch continued. "Full light, no shadows, clear faces, and then he said they were part of the entertainment portfolio." Another sleeve, another photo. This time the camera's lens had caught more than intended. A reflection in a gilded mirror on the far wall. A tiny, precise black dot embedded in the frame's corner. Jasmine leaned forward. "What is that?" "Not dust," Finch said. "A pinhole camera. Same type I'd seen in Atlantic City hotels. Built into the frame, angled toward the center of the room." A ripple of unease swept through the gallery. Even on the projection screen, the dot seemed to glare back at them. An unblinking mechanical eye. Finch slid out another photo, laying it flat. Donald Trump, mid-toast. Champagne glass raised, his gaze locked on something out of frame. And behind him, partially obscured but unmistakable, the same row of girls, the same stiff white dresses. This time, one of them was looking directly at the camera, her eyes wide, unguarded, caught in the split second before she could mask whatever she was feeling. Fear. The image hit harder than words. The gallery's collective posture shifted as though they'd all instinctively leaned away from the screen. Trump's lips parted, but nothing came out. He glanced at his lawyers, but none met his eyes. "I was told," Finch said quietly, "not to deliver these to the bride, not even to Trump. I was told to hand them to a courier from Epstein's office. Cash changed hands. $5,000 to forget they existed. Jasmine's voice was a scalpel. Why didn't you destroy them? Finch's answer came without hesitation. Because I knew someday someone like her, he gestured toward Maria, would have the courage to speak. And photographs don't forget. On the screen, Trump remained frozen mid-toast, the girls locked forever in that frame behind him. No one in the chamber moved, because there was nothing left to say that the picture hadn't already said. And then Jasmine spoke. Not loudly, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knows the next moment will change the temperature of the room. Photographs, she said, capture a second, but sometimes the second isn't enough. She reached down to a black evidence case at her feet. Her hands didn't rush. They unlatched it with the same precision one might use to open a safe. Inside, cushioned in foam, was a plastic VHS cassette. The white label, faded from decades, bore a handwritten note in blue ink. Cam 3, VIP Suite, Deck 93. A technician at the far end of the chamber rolled a cart forward. On it, an aging VHS deck, patched into the projection system. The chamber's lights dimmed to a murky half-glow, and the whir of the machine filled the silence. The first few seconds were nothing but static. Horizontal white lines racing across a black field, the faint hum of analog tape. Then the image steadied. The room on the screen was familiar. The same velvet, the same gold-frame mirrors, but the camera's perspective was different. Higher, hidden. In the center of the frame, Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein stood side by side. Both held champagne flutes. Both were laughing. The laughter wasn't the polite kind exchanged between acquaintances. It was loose, comfortable, threaded with the unspoken language of men who believed the walls would never talk. Jasmine didn't narrate. She didn't need to. The footage carried itself. Epstein leaned slightly toward Trump, speaking into his ear. The mic was faint, but the words could be made out. Palm Beach is going to love her. Trump chuckled, tipping his glass. His reply was clearer, the consonants snapping against the hiss of old tape. Already told my guy. Flight's on Monday. Somewhere in the gallery, a chair creaked under the weight of someone leaning forward too far. And then, the door in the background opened. A girl stepped inside. Small frame, white dress, shoulders bare. She froze just inside the threshold, hands clasped in front of her, eyes wide but unblinking. Neither man moved toward her immediately. They let the moment breathe, the way a predator might linger at the edge of a clearing before crossing in. Then Trump turned, glass still in hand. He crossed the space slowly, deliberately, like each step was an announcement. When he reached her, he crouched slightly, not in deference, but to close the gap without losing his height. His mouth moved close to her ear. The room heard him clearly. You'll like Florida. The words landed with surgical precision, cutting through the stale air of the chamber into living rooms across the country. The girl didn't reply. She didn't even nod, but her shoulders tightened, her hands curling slightly at her sides. On the projection screen, Trump straightened, smiling. Not for the camera, not for her, but for the moment itself. Then the image wavered, as if the tape itself resisted being watched. A sudden burst of static tore across the frame. When the picture returned, the girl was gone. The door closed, and only the two men remained in view. Jasmine's voice was quiet but direct. This tape was recovered from a private storage unit in Yonkers 3 months ago. It was mislabeled under equipment rentals. The chain of custody is documented, and the timestamp matches the ledger entry for E16. On the screen, the image froze, Trump mid-smile, Epstein's head turning toward him. The grain of the analog feed made their faces ghost-like, but still unmistakable. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the journalists in the press row had stopped typing. And then the reaction began. Not in the chamber, but beyond it. Phones in the gallery lit up as viewers at home clipped the feed. Within minutes, the footage was bouncing between Twitter threads, Reddit posts, TikTok frames dissected second by second. Monsieur, You'll Like Florida began trending before the hearing had even moved to its next witness. But inside the room, the weight was different. It wasn't the frenzy of the internet. It was the suffocating awareness that every person present was now part of an unerasable record. Trump leaned toward his microphone. "That's doctored," he said, voice tight. "It's fake. That could be anybody. That could be—" "It's you," Jasmine said without raising her voice. "It's the same suit, the same tie, the same champagne glass you're holding in photographs taken that night. And it's the same voice captured on multiple sources." The technician paused the tape again, zooming in on the moment Trump leaned toward the girl. The frame caught the reflection of the champagne flute in the mirror, the same telltale black dot of a pinhole camera visible in the corner. "We didn't know the mirrors had cameras," Finch's voice came from the gallery. "But they did." The chamber didn't erupt. It constricted. And in that tightness, in that absolute stillness, the footage kept playing in homes, offices, and bars across America, long after the networks tried and failed to cut away. Jasmine let the silence breathe for a long, punishing beat. She didn't reach for the ledger this time. Instead, she drew a single folded sheet of white paper from the inside pocket of her jacket. No binder, no evidence bag. Just a page, crisp, clean, and terrifying in its simplicity. She stood. "For 31 years, she began, her voice measured, these girls have existed only as codes. E15, E16, E17. Numbers in a column, ink on paper, buried in a ledger no one was meant to see." Her eyes swept the room once, over the committee, the press, the gallery, and finally the man at the center table. "Today," she said, "they have names." She looked down at the page and spoke the first one. "Ana Morales." The syllables rang in the chamber like a struck bell. The sound didn't echo, but it seemed to expand, filling the air in a way that made every ear strain to hold it. "Belle Takahashi, Charlotte Rowe, Danica Yilm." Her cadence was unbroken, her tone neither rising nor falling. Each name was a toll, a measured strike in a sequence that had waited 3 decades to be heard. "Amelia Santos, Farrah Monroe." Somewhere in the gallery, someone inhaled too sharply, the sound carrying into the microphones. "Grace Yun, Helena Duarte, Isabel Chen, Jenny Vasquez." She paused, looking down at the last 2. Her voice didn't falter, but the space between breaths seemed to stretch. "Caitlin Miles, Lily Darrow." When the final name left her lips, the room didn't applaud. It didn't gasp. It simply sat in the weight of 12 lives that had, until now, been hidden behind numbers. Across the country, in a modest kitchen in rural Indiana, a woman stood barefoot on cold linoleum, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. She had the hearing on, the volume low. Just background noise while she tried to ignore the ache in her chest that came every December. And then she heard it. "Caitlin Miles." The mug slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor, hot coffee blooming across the tile. Her knees buckled, one hand gripping the counter for balance. The other rose to her mouth before she could stop it. "Oh my God," she whispered into the empty room. "That's my daughter." She hadn't spoken those words in 29 years. Not in public, not even to herself. The official story had been that Caitlin ran away. No leads, no sightings. The file was marked inactive, but now her daughter's name had been spoken in the halls of Congress. Not in suspicion, not in speculation. In fact, back in the hearing room, Jasmine folded the page once, then again, and set it on the table in front of her. She didn't read from it again. She didn't have to. Trump's gaze stayed fixed on the tabletop. He hadn't looked up since the first name was read. His lawyers scribbled notes that no one would read aloud. Jasmine's voice returned, softer now, but with an edge that cut through the chamber's stillness. "These aren't codes. They aren't rumors. They are daughters, sisters, friends. They were people before they were entries in your ledgers." The chairperson shifted in his seat, the wood creaking under the motion. Across the gallery, a journalist closed her laptop without typing a word. Some moments were too heavy for live commentary. Jasmine glanced at the projection screen, still frozen on the blurred VHS frame of the white-dressed girl and the man leaning toward her. "Numbers are easy to ignore," she said. "Names aren't." Her eyes locked back on Trump. "You wanted them to be forgotten. You buried them under ink, codes, and stamps. But names survive. They wait." She didn't raise her voice, but the words landed like a verdict. "And now," she said, "the world knows them." The stillness that followed was not the same as before. It wasn't shock anymore. It was recognition, the point at which silence becomes a kind of mourning. In Indiana, the woman in the kitchen sank to the floor, coffee pooling around her. She didn't care. She reached for the phone with shaking hands. Somewhere, miles away, another parent was doing the same. Back in Washington, the hearing room doors opened without ceremony, but with the kind of authority that made heads turn. Two men in dark suits stepped inside. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their lapel pins, the eagle clutching a shield, told everyone who they were. Department of Justice. A third agent followed, carrying a flat black case. No one announced them, but their presence shifted the air, as if the temperature in the chamber had dropped 3 degrees. They moved to the front without breaking stride. One agent handed a sealed envelope to the chairperson. The other opened the black case and removed a slim laptop, already connected to the projection system. On the screen, the ledger entries disappeared, replaced by a clean digital document header: confidentiality agreement, non-disclosure, image destruction clause. Page 1 filled the screen in crisp, scanned clarity. The DOJ agent clicked to page 2. The clause was highlighted in yellow. The undersigned agrees to permanently destroy all photographic, video, or audio recordings of special guests within 24 months of the event date, and to refrain from retaining, duplicating, or distributing said materials in any form. Beneath it, in bold, special guests, Yokorn attendees not listed in the public guest registry. The next click brought up signatures, dozens of them. Names written in blue and black ink, some looping and elaborate, others tight and defensive. The audience leaned forward, necks craning toward the screen. And then, there it was. Gregory Finch. The signature was unmistakable. The G curved into a looping tail, the F tall and angular. A murmur rolled through the gallery, low but unmistakable. Finch didn't shift in his seat. He didn't look away from the screen. His hands stayed folded in front of him, fingers laced tightly. Jasmine's eyes slid toward him, steady but not accusatory. "Mr. Finch," she said, "is this your signature?" Finch exhaled through his nose, the breath slow. "Yes." "You were paid to sign this NDA?" "Yes." His voice didn't rise, didn't stumble. $5,000 in cash. Trump leaned toward his microphone. "See? He was paid. He's not credible. He's in breach of contract." "Mr. Trump," Jasmine cut in, "paying someone to keep quiet about minors in your VIP suites is not exculpatory. It is evidence." The DOJ agent clicked again. Page after page of NDAs appeared. Florists, caterers, drivers, security guards, each bound by the same clause. The pattern was clear. Anyone who might have seen what they weren't meant to see was gagged under threat of lawsuit, bankruptcy, or worse. One name after another filled the screen until the list felt endless. Finch finally spoke, his voice softer now. "I signed it because I didn't think anyone would ever ask again, and because I was afraid. We all were." Jasmine didn't press him further. The list on the screen had already spoken volumes. The DOJ agent reached the final page of the file. The last signature wasn't a vendor or a staffer or a photographer. It was an assistant district attorney from Palm Beach County, dated January 1994. The silence after that wasn't confusion. It was comprehension. The wall that had kept the truth contained for 31 years wasn't just made of fear. It was made of paper, ink, and signatures. A lattice of complicity stretching from hotel corridors to courtrooms. And now, piece by piece, it was being projected for millions to see. The chairperson set the envelope down without opening it. The message was already clear. The documents inside would be evidence in something larger than a hearing. Trump leaned back in his chair, the muscles in his jaw tight, his gaze fixed somewhere just above the heads of the committee members. Finch kept his eyes on the screen, as if daring the signatures to fade. They didn't. They glowed under the white light, unblinking. Jasmine didn't sit down. She turned her gaze to the DOJ agent at the projector. "Show the last file." The agent didn't speak, just navigated to a folder marked video. Restricted. The cursor hovered for a heartbeat before the double click. The screen went black for a second, then filled with a tight, grainy image. This wasn't the wide ballroom or the gilded mirrors. This was closer. Closer than anyone should have been. Two men, Trump on the left, Epstein on the right, both leaning slightly inward, their heads almost touching. Between them, blurred in the background, was a girl. Barely 13 by the look of her, hair tied in a loose ribbon, a dress too big for her shoulders. The footage had no background music, no crowd chatter, only the faint mechanical hiss of an old hidden mic. "Already arranged," Trump said. His voice was low, almost swallowed, but the words were crisp enough to slice. He didn't gesture toward Epstein. He gestured past him, toward the girl. Epstein nodded, the corner of his mouth tightening in something like approval. The DOJ agent froze the frame. The three figures, the man pointing, the man nodding, the child staring somewhere beyond the camera, were locked in perfect damning stillness. In the hearing room, the silence didn't feel like the earlier silences. This one was hot, electric, charged with the recognition of something irrevocable. Then the agent rolled the tape forward again. Just 2 seconds more. Epstein's lips moved. "She's younger than she looks." Trump's reply, a smirk and a single word. "Good." The gallery didn't gasp. They inhaled, one unified, sharp breath, and then no one breathed at all. It was Trump who broke first. His hand, which had been gripping the edge of the table, slipped. The weight of his body seemed to shift unevenly, as if the floor had tilted beneath him. He blinked hard, once, twice. His mouth opened like he might speak, but nothing came. Then, in a movement that seemed almost slow, his other hand rose to his chest. His fingers spread over the fabric of his suit, pressing against the sternum as his shoulders hunched forward. "Sir?" one of his lawyers whispered, leaning toward him. Trump didn't answer. His chair scraped backward against the marble as his knees buckled. The sound was jarring in the hush, metal legs shrieking against stone. He collapsed sideways, his body hitting the floor with a muted thud. The microphone caught the short, harsh sound of breath punched out of him on impact. Chaos rippled. Not loud, not yet, but urgent. Agents moved in. Medics stationed at the back were already pushing forward. On the screen above them, the frozen image still held. Trump's hand mid-gesture toward the girl. Epstein's head turned toward him, the child framed between them. The hearing did not recess. The cameras didn't cut away. Viewers at home, all 102 million of them, watched as a man who had once branded himself unbreakable was lowered onto his back, an oxygen mask pressed to his face. His lips moved under the clear plastic, but whatever he said was swallowed by the rush of the medic's commands. The DOJ agent didn't touch the controls. The frame on the screen did not change. The country watched one image while another unfolded at the foot of the dais. A body not lifeless, but stripped of the armor it had worn for decades. And in that perfect overlap, the evidence and the man, something shifted permanently. He did not die, but something else did. The unshakable myth. The performance of invincibility. The illusion that his empire was beyond reach. In living rooms, bars, kitchen counters, and office break rooms, the moment etched itself into memory. The second power collapsed not with a resignation speech, but with a hand clutching at its own heart. By the time the medics lifted him onto a stretcher, the internet had already crowned it the fall, and no one looking at that still frame could unsee it again. The hearing room, though shaken, did not empty. The stretcher rolled out, the echo of its wheels fading into the hallway, and the doors closed again. Jasmine remained standing. She hadn't moved since the collapse, her posture as still as the frozen frame above her. Trump pointing toward a child, Epstein turning to look, the girl caught between them like a living indictment. She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until even the cameras seemed to lean closer. Then she looked directly into one of them. Not at the committee, not at the gallery, at the lens. The black, unblinking eye that was staring back at millions of people across the country. "What happens," she asked, her voice low but resonant, "when we find the rest of the footage?" There was no reaction in the room. Not because the question was weak, but because it wasn't meant for the people in front of her. It was meant for everyone watching. The camera didn't cut away. In a sports bar in Atlanta, someone stopped mid-sentence and repeated it out loud. In a college library in Portland, a group huddled around a laptop, the phrase slipping into their whispered arguments. In a bus terminal in Detroit, a man with a cracked phone screen typed the words into a post, no hashtags, no punctuation, just the question. And in 1,000 living rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, and sidewalks, the sentence began to fracture and multiply, carried on timelines and group chats, reposted and screen captured until it no longer belonged to Jasmine alone. What happens when we find the rest of the footage? On Twitter, it appeared over a still image of Trump on the floor. On Instagram, it ran under the VHS freeze frame of the 13-year-old girl. On TikTok, it was whispered over slow replays of the hidden camera angle. The question didn't accuse, it didn't demand. It simply hung there, impossible to answer without first acknowledging the truth that had already surfaced. And that was its power. Because outside the Capitol walls, the machinery that had kept the ledger closed, the NDAs signed and the tapes buried, was starting to groan under its own weight. The clips weren't just being shared, they were being archived, mirrored, and copied into encrypted drives in basements and bedrooms across the country. Every time a platform tried to take one down, 3 more links appeared. Every time a network avoided airing the line already arranged, someone else stitched it back into the timeline. The DOJ agents had already packed their files, but their presence lingered in the air like the memory of thunder. Jasmine sat at last, not with relief, but with the kind of measured stillness that comes after you've pushed the first domino and know the rest will fall without your hand. She closed the folder in front of her, the paper inside now almost irrelevant. The story had escaped the room. Outside, the winter light was thinning, bleeding orange into the edges of the Capitol dome. Somewhere beyond the traffic, the city's hum continued, unaware that a phrase born in this room was about to be written on posters, shouted at rallies, printed on shirts, and spray-painted onto brick walls. What happens when we find the rest of the footage? It would be the thing whispered in the ears of the powerful, the thing muttered in late-night conversations between lawyers and clients, the thing that would make certain hands shake before signing another NDA. And for those who had spent decades convinced they could burn every record, erase every image, and silence every witness, it would be the reminder that somewhere, someone still had the rest of the tape. In the hearing room, the chairperson cleared his throat, signaling a procedural close. But it didn't matter. The real closing had already happened the moment Jasmine's question left her lips. Outside, the sky over Washington was the color of ash. Inside, every camera light blinked red. History will not remember the codes or the clauses. It will remember the moment numbers became names and silence gave way to truth. Power built on fear can burn bright, but it cannot outlast the steady hands of those who refuse to look away. In the end, justice is not a single act, but the choice to keep searching, even when the light hurts our eyes. If this story unsettled you, don't look away. Sit with it, share it, say their names, like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes the past can be buried. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where ledgers open, walls fall, and the silence breaks. Hit the bell, because the next tape may be closer than you think. It's unfiltered, and it might change the way you measure power. This is a fictional dramatization, born from real patterns of abuse and the courage to confront them. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental, or a mirror for reflection and accountability. Thanks for watching. Truth doesn't survive by accident. It survives because someone refuses to let it die. This is Harrison Stories,